Robert is going to talk about the difference between vision and reality, I think. Robert is the director of I for Intrinsic. Robert.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Can I also ask for a show of hands of all of you who'd like to see a better future? That's good stuff. And keep your hands up if you know how to deliver that future. And that's exactly part of the paradigm I'm going to talk about this afternoon. We're going to look into establishing why the fundamental problem isn't to envisage a better future, it's about how to deliver it. And it's interesting to note that 70% of strategies fail to deliver what they're expected to. And what we're going to look at today is within highways infrastructure is to try and establish why that might be and how we can improve on it. So first, let's look at some ancient infrastructure. We couldn't actually find any pictures of roads that had lasted 4,000 years, so we started with the pyramids. And you have to say to yourself, if the labour laws might be a little bit different from how they were back in 4,000 years ago, and perhaps health and safety hasn't quite made it onto the agenda back then, but you've got to admire something that's been there for 4,000 years. And coming back to one of my colleagues' comments from earlier on, he's planning for 110. These guys were planning for much longer. But let's start to look underneath that figure of 70% failure in delivering strategy. Now, McKinsey's research will tell you that only 70% of companies actually even have a plan for how to deliver their strategy. And 70% of organizations don't bother to complete the implementation of the activities, and 70% of those activities fail to deliver, only 70% of those activities actually deliver sustainable change. And if you compound those three figures together, you come up with an overall success rate of 34%, which turn it on its head to get the failure rate, and you're left with a 66%, which is perilously close to the 70% failure rate we started with. Now, I've done a little bit of sleight of hand with the figures there, for those of you who are watching, but the fundamental underlying issue is the same, is the reason why strategies fail is due to a complex interplay of different factors. And we're going to look at some of those today. Here's another piece of engineering infrastructure that stood the test of time. What we will say, though, is when Stonehenge was built, engineering has moved on a little bit since then. I don't think anybody would suggest using the same approaches. But in terms of making massive change in our national infrastructure, we still take the same approach. We take the viewpoint that says, let's throw lots of people, money, and machinery at the problem, and hopefully we'll get the results we want to achieve. And what's worth knowing is actually that's not always the case. There are situations that no matter how much you throw at it, you're not going to get the solutions you want, because what is required is smarter thinking. It's not just throwing more resources at it. And it's been nice in the conference so far to see some ideas of that, and certainly out in the hall, organizations bringing forward new ideas. But the real challenge for the industry is how do we create new thinking while continuing to think in the old ways? And what happens in many instances is the old thinking gets in the way. And therefore, what we need to do is to start out by throwing away the current thinking that might be holding us back. It's a very difficult thing to do, and sometimes has to be done in quite dramatic fashion. And it was Robert J. Kriegel, who in the 90s had a very good marketing idea. He came up with a concept that says, if it ain't broke, then we should break it. And what we're going to do here today is just look at a number of ideas that perhaps we could take and break that might make our investment in highways infrastructure a bit more successful. So the first idea we're going to challenge is that the best way to deliver huge tranches of change is through a long list of projects, each of which is a great leap forwards. Well, I'm going to challenge that, and I'm going to say it's not about controlling the costs, it's not about ticking off the activities, and it's not about measuring the inputs. It's about harnessing the passion. This is Billy Graham, one of the great evangelists of the last 100 years. It's about focusing on the outcomes, and it's about encouraging each of the people who work for us to deliver things differently and to progress beyond what they would normally expect to be able to deliver. And it's not about great leaps forwards, it's about stamina and persistence. It's about a lot of small changes and making sure each of those changes stick and give you traction. Moving forwards with transformation is more of a marathon than a sprint, and it's not a field event. It's about continually doing the things that we know will make a difference. It's about thinking differently, it's about acting differently, and it's about behaving differently. The next thing we're going to look at is the concept that says leadership is something senior managers do. Now, 4,000 years ago, it probably was. And I have to admit that if we all took the idea that we'd like to have a 500-foot tomb built to celebrate the fact that we stood upon this earth, I don't think we'd make it through the DCO. But I'm going to push an idea that says to you, leadership nowadays is something anybody can do, and any small idea can be started and used to drive a vision forwards. The measure of leaders is in their ability to convince others to follow them of their own volition. At I4 Intrinsic, we think it's very important that Great Britain and Northern Ireland deserve the best public infrastructure and services in the world. And we see our role in leading that forwards. In terms of delivering the vision for the investment in highways infrastructure, we also see that it's important that the leadership of how that is delivered is delegated down as low as it can be. It's the responsibility of all of us, and that it's not acceptable if we're going to make the success of the investment for people to be turning around and saying, well, we can't do anything at the moment because we're waiting for Highways England to take the leadership role. It's the responsibility of all of us to lead. Number 3 is that this is an organisation. Well, I'm going to say to you, this isn't an organisation. Organisations, strangely enough, consist of people and people undertaking activities. Just drawing one of these does not create an organisation. Organisation consists of these things. It's about people working together in a common cause, all for one and one for all. And the mark of a leader is the way in which they can bring people together to deliver the strategy. And there needs to be much more of a focus of this if we're going to achieve something. We can't afford to continue to put up organisational diagrams and charts and draw something, put it in a proposal, say a few things about some projects that may have been successful one time, and expect that's going to change the future. It's not. Money is not the same as value. You can't monetize quality of life. You can't monetize the national pride in delivering the sort of future that we want for our children. Money is a convenient way of comparing different schemes and different options. However, let's not lose sight of the challenges and the drawbacks of just using money as a way of measuring things. Because as soon as we do, what tends to start happening is we start driving towards the lowest cost solution, which doesn't deliver the benefits that we were all looking for in the first place. Okay, there's a belief amongst the construction design community that delivering this is the hard stuff. Well, I'm sorry to tell you guys, but there is a paper-thin difference between the capabilities and the stories you all put into the proposals about what you're going to do. There is practically no difference in the offerings that you put forwards. What you are offering is becoming a commodity, and we all know what happens to profit margins in the world of commodities, and it's not a sustainable model for the business. And also, this isn't actually the hard stuff. This is the hard stuff. It's about the behaviors and the thoughts we have. It's about the actions we take. And none of the major players differentiates itself on the real hard stuff, on the people factors, and that's where the real differentiation could be completed. And just to leave you with a thought here of that you might want to take home is to consider how much has changed. Just think to yourself, what did I see here when this picture went up? Did I see a man interviewing a woman? Did I see a woman interviewing a man? Or did I see two colleagues perhaps talking to one another? So there's 5 ideas that might actually change the industry into being a flying dinosaur. But I'm going to leave you with 3 even more radical thoughts of the ways in which we could get a better return on the investment in highways infrastructure. The first is one that I've heard several times today, so I'm quite pleased to support it, is that it's not about the road running behind us, it's about the customers and the journeys. And I'm glad to see there's not many people left in the room by this time, because I'm going to put out a heretical thought and suggest to you that we also keep open for much longer the idea of, should we actually be building a road? Perhaps a railway might be more acceptable or a better solution. And before I get lynched when I go out, the converse is true as well. And what we need to keep open is this concept that says we're trying to resolve a problem about journeys. We're not trying to resolve a problem about how do we get the maximum number of cars through. I'm going to also suggest as a second heretical thought that we incentivize the outcomes, not the inputs. Now, a lot of the firms we work with will tell us that the current contract isn't built with the right incentive mechanism. I'm going to go further than that, and I'm going to say that if we incentivize the economic growth, if we incentivize the employment opportunities, and we incentivize around the new housing and the new investment, we will get a very different type of scheme design, and we would get a lot more attention on delivering those values that we wanted out of it long after the cones have disappeared. Because the current status is, once the cones go, everyone thinks the scheme is over. And the last thing I'm going to say to you, it's about the communities and the stakeholders, it's about the journeys and the commuters. After all, they're the people who are paying the taxes, and they're the people we're doing this for in the first place, aren't they? And so, yes, it is about the construction and design teams, but when we take and decide what we're going to think about today, tomorrow, and next week, we need to consider everybody with equal weighting. It's as much about the hard hats as it should be about the warm hearts. It's about relationships and contacts. It's about opinions and persuasions. It's about alignment and advocacy as much as it is about muscles and machinery. So I'm going to leave you with the final thought, that is to dare to think differently. Take it home, think of it as an idea, and we may get some different and more impact in how we bring strategy into action. Thank you.